This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air. This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
The Science Notes podcast on OAR FM Dunedin, brought to you by the Division of Sciences at the University of Otago. I'm Dave McMorrin. Over the next half hour, I'll be chatting with a graduate science student about their research, their passion for science, and the things that fuel their creativity. Well, hello again and welcome to Science Notes. My name's Dave McMorrin, and this time our guest is Chris Mills. Hi, Chris.
Kia ora, how are we doing?
I'm well. Thank you for coming along on a supposedly summer Dunedin day. We're going to be talking to Chris tonight about what he's been doing for his PhD. It is PhD, isn't it?
Yep.
Yes, I should know that. His PhD work in chemistry at Otago University. How far through are you?
Nearing the end of my third year, actually.
Right. So it's getting to the pointy end.
Yeah, crunch time.
Exciting. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of what you've been up to, how is it that you find yourself almost at the end of a PhD in chemistry?
I would say by accident. I never actually came to Otago to end up in chemistry.
Right.
The initial purpose of coming to Otago was to go into medicine as is advertised.
Yeah.
So gone through the health science program as we now teach in terms of the chemistry.
Yep.
Unfortunately, didn't get quite the grades I was hoping.
Right.
But sort of fell in love with the chemistry and pursued that. And I was still intending to go into medicine afterwards. But I was offered an opportunity as a summer studentship under Anna, which sort of inspired my desire to pursue research and continue further and actually put the idea of doing medicine behind. And
right. Forever now.
Yeah. So
because you're right, because there are people who will finish a degree and then go back to medicine after that. We've had a few people in chemistry do that.
Yeah, so no intention of
the
that.
appeal is gone.
No, yeah.
No, I'm not sure I ever understand the appeal in the first place, to be honest. But
it's just a fanciful idea when you're at high school. But,
yes, that you and all your parents have.
Yeah. Oh, my parents didn't mind too much, but I think it was more just myself wanting to push myself to see how far I could go.
Yep.
But now I'm 7 years into a chemistry degree.
Yep, and almost Dr. Chris.
Really? Doctor in some respect, anyway.
So, you are doing physical chemistry, and you're working in a group, and we've had some students from your group on the show previous, but you're actually doing a slightly different slant on what a lot of the students are doing, and that normally, at least from my experience of it, normally people in the group do clusters, and you're not doing clusters. So you're doing batteries.
Yes, batteries.
So how is it that, was there a background interest in batteries that led you to choose this topic, or?
Well, my background in this research group actually started with hydrogen. So investigating how we can produce hydrogen from water through electrolysis. So just running a current through material and getting hydrogen on the other side.
Yep. One of the most topical and arguably important chemical reactions around at the moment.
Yeah, so that's where I started, which my inspiration for pursuing that was greener fuels, greener futures sort of idea. But then when it came to doing the PhD, I wanted to investigate something new, something different, to sort of challenge myself a bit more, step out of the comfort zone of what I'd been doing and try out new techniques and software predominantly.
Yeah. So for you, but also for the group?
Yeah, completely new software for the group.
Right.
Yeah. And
so you're interested then in exploring a type of battery which I hadn't really heard about, to be honest, before. I heard you speak at the conference just recently, but also you sent me notes. Something called a redox fuel cell.
Yeah. So these have existed for about 50 years or so. And as opposed to like a normal battery like you get in your phone or anywhere else, which is typically solid deposits at either end of the battery. So you have the positive and negative side.
Yep. So in a battery, that's like there's the sort of the metal bit, the rod that goes down the middle of the battery.
Yeah.
And then there's the case on the outside, isn't there? And those are the two electrodes.
Yeah, yeah.
And then there's some sort of weird pasty stuff.
Yeah, so that
leaks out
pasty
and-
stuff is predominantly solid or depositing at either end, depending on when you charge or use the power within the battery. These ones are entirely liquid.
Right.
So essentially just a coloured juice. And excitingly, these are quite colourful in terms of their appearance, having purple, green, yellow, and purple, yellow, green, blue. That's the last one.
Yeah, blue. Yep.
So because of the different states that the vanadium, which is the element in the batteries, exist, they possess all these different colours. But those colours come from the number of electrons that they occupy.
Right. So I was going to ask you, why vanadium? I mean, from my very cursory reading around redox flow cells, there are various different types that you can get. But vanadium does seem to be quite a significant one in this game. So why vanadium?
So as opposed to other redox flow batteries, so these can be a mixture of different elements, but the reason the vanadium ones are quite worthy to pursue is the fact that you have a membrane, so a membrane where it's a bit porous and you can have cross-contamination potentially occur from one side to the other.
Yeah.
Because you have the same element, it doesn't sort of cause any fallout of your battery in terms of it losing its power storage.
Right.
And so it lasts a lot longer than other redox flow batteries where you do have different species on either side. So the fact that you can keep the same one is what's the major benefit.
So if I understand it right, in a normal battery, you have the metal rod that's in the middle, and you have the metal casing on the outside.
Yeah.
And the electricity is generated by electrons wanting to move from the middle to the outside or vice versa.
Yeah.
Through the pasty stuff. Whereas what you've got is you've got two solutions separated by a membrane, and the electrons are going from one solution through the membrane to the other solution.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the thing with the vanadium then is that the vanadium is able to, on one side of in one of the solutions, it's able to give away electrons.
Yeah.
To go through the membrane, and then on the
receive.
other side, the vanadium's able to receive it. And that's why vanadium's really good, right? Because it can do lots of that sort of stuff.
Yeah, because all those different colours, you have two of those colours on one side, two on the other, which allows it to do that exchange of the electron.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the basic idea of a vanadium redox fuel cell. What is it that you're specifically doing?
So I actually don't deal with any of these pretty colours, unfortunately. I'm stuck in the digital world of exploring how these batteries actually function.
Right.
And despite these batteries existing for well over 50 years, the mechanism is not well known. So the actual steps at which these vanadium atoms transition from one of those coloured states to the other and exchanging that electron from one side to the other. So I'm trying to elucidate how that's occurring through computational exploration of the electrode surface with the vanadium interacting with it.
Yeah, because in fact we've missed out this bit, but into the solutions there's carbon electrodes as well, isn't there? Because you have to have somewhere to complete the circuit and yeah. And so you're interested in the way that these vanadium things, whatever they are, interact with the electrode.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so why is there a difference between one coloured vanadium and another?
So the different colours occur due to the number of electrons.
Yep.
With the vanadium ion or atom, whatever you're more familiar with. So that's where you get the different colours. And so when you interact with that electrode surface with, say, a blue, and it comes into contact with the surface, it'll then change to a yellow on the other side because it would have lost or gained an electron, depending on which way you're going. So that's why you get the different colours.
But the way that it interacts with... I mean, I from what I remember from reading your notes, in part, the way that it can interact and do that, giving away an electron thing, depends on the way that the vanadium's interacting with the solution itself.
Yes. So, this sort of goes to the very start of my PhD, which was exploring how the vanadium ions were essentially surrounded by water or other salts or electrolytes. But that was just so that we could have an understanding how it appeared in solution and then everything moving with it.
Yeah.
To interact with that surface
because
as well.
you don't have the individual just a vanadium by itself. It's always got things around it.
Yeah, we're not working in an isolated vacuum of space.
Yes.
Yeah. No. So, we want to have a good representation of what's around it.
Right.
Yeah.
So part of the research then is trying to, by calculations, try and understand how that interaction works.
Yeah.
Because that'll mediate in turn how that interacts with the electrodes.
Yeah, well, that's at least the assumption that we're running on because a lot of it's unknown.
Yeah.
So,
so when people have actually built these things, have they built them with different ingredients in the solutions
essentially,
and seen differences?
Yeah, they've seen differences, but the actual reason for the differences is largely unknown. And you look in the literature and everyone's arguing against each other in terms of what's best with those ingredients, or even just the actual carbon electrode itself as to what's best too.
Because there's different. I mean, what sort of electrodes are you modelling? Is that part of it, or
it is part of it?
Yeah.
We're just trying to currently determine where on the electrode surface it could interact with most favorably,
right? And
then from there explore how it comes into contact. So, there's a lot of contention as to what's going on.
And so you're using fancy software then and supercomputers and stuff to try and understand these interactions?
Yes. So the software utilizes quantum mechanics to actually model the systems in terms of a very small representation of the overall cell, just so we can sample at the minuscule detail as to what's going on. Yeah.
And is it working?
That's a good question, isn't it? I would say we're successfully running calculations and trying to decipher what's going on, but actually trying to interpret the information we're receiving is the more challenging side of things.
Yeah.
Especially because we're trying new techniques that we haven't used before.
Yeah.
Which adds to the confusion of, I guess, extracting what's important.
So do you have some sort of experimental system that you're trying to, because normally when you do calculations, I think what you're trying to do is, the calculation's working when you are getting the same answers as what you find when you do the experiment. Is there an experimental setup that you're trying to compare your calculations with? Or
what we're mostly trying to do is try to provide, for the most part, when we do these modelling on electrode surfaces or any sort of catalysis where you're changing the starting material to get a final product, is to provide some sort of information to potentially an experimentalist,
right?
In terms of what alterations they can make to essentially guide or inform future decision making. So what we've been looking at is how on the surface you can substitute different elements, or
on the electrode surface.
On the electrode surface. So it's mostly carbon, but you can get, say, nitrogen or phosphate or oxygen. And so we're trying to figure out where on the surface, if it's the carbon atoms, is it the nitrogen, is it the phosphate, what's actually the part of the electrode that the vanadium is actually interacting with when undergoing this transformation from one colour to another.
Yeah. Because me, with my chemist hat on from years ago, I would have thought vanadium would prefer to interact with a nitrogen than a carbon.
Yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to elucidate.
But you don't know if that's actually the case until you go looking. So
so we do have collaborators up in Christchurch who have done these sort of studies before.
Right.
Where
the actual experimental work.
Yeah. So what they've been doing is adding these nitrogen groups to the electrode surface, and they are seeing a faster exchange
Right.
going from one colour to another. But the actual underlying reason for that is unknown.
Okay.
Because unfortunately you can't really zoom in and see what's going on at the atomic scale that easily.
Oh, that it was that easy.
And so what we're trying to do is help explain to them or provide some sort of rationale as to what's going on, because they're not sure if adding the nitrogens have made more carbon edges. So essentially, if you imagine like an infinite sheet of paper, is it better to interact with the flat part of the paper, or is it the edge?
Yeah.
And the edge being the carbon edge, or the flat part being a basal plane. So is it better to work on the basal plane or the edge of the carbon? Is it better to interact with a nitrogen somewhere on the edge or on that basal plane?
Yeah.
What's going on?
Yeah. And so you can go backwards and forwards then.
Yeah.
You can do the calculations and suggest some things. They can do the experiments. And
Yeah. Or we can at least, because they were unsure, like you add the nitrogen, it makes it more favourable to have this reaction go on. But adding the nitrogen makes more of the edges. So
Right.
is it the edge or is it the nitrogen?
Yeah.
What's
No,
responsible?
fair enough. Yeah. Cool.
So, yeah, that's what we're trying to clarify for them at least.
Right. And so you're making some progress then?
Making some progress.
Slowly, but
yeah. It's just running these calculations can take some time.
Yes. So for you, typically, how long does a calculation take?
Depends what calculation we're
In
discussing.
these days of supercomputers and craziness?
So I think the longest ones I've been running have taken at least a month.
Right. It's
Which is a long time to be doing one step.
Yep.
But fortunately, because it's all held up in a supercomputer up in Wellington, you can send off the calculation,
Yes.
let it run, and do other work at the same time.
Right. So it's physically actually running in the supercomputer for a month. It's not like it's queued up waiting its turn or something. And
Yeah, so you could say we're lazy in terms of chemistry because the computer does all the work and we just sit around doing other things. But so yeah, it does take a month, but it's not us doing the work as such.
No, fair enough. To be fair, if you're making molecules, half the time it's the molecules doing the work. You're just providing the environment for them to do what you want them to do. So
Yeah, good argument.
So you're almost done. Mm-hmm. What next for you?
Very good question. I think it's the same. I probably still feel the same way as I did when I was in high school when people ask, like, what are you going to do when you're older? The answer's still, I don't know.
No, you're not old yet. So.
No. I've definitely had a few ideas floating around. One of the ones most appealing to me is potentially going into a government advisory role.
Right.
Which has become inspired or was inspired through some of the workshops that I've participated in with the McDermott Institute.
Yeah.
Predominantly through the MESA group, which is a subgroup of the McDermott Institute. And I just felt quite inspired to, I guess, have a bit more of an impact on what goes on within New Zealand mostly. I want to stay here and want to have a positive change for the future. So I thought that would be a place I'd like to
Cool.
potentially go.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Chris. We're just about out of time, but thank you for coming along, telling us what you've been up to.
Mm-hmm.
And all the best for the writing.
Thank you. Yeah.
The defence
a lot of
and all
writing
that
to go.
stuff.
Yeah.
And for whatever's next.
Cool.
Okay. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to the Science Notes podcast, brought to you by the Division of Sciences at the University of Otago. To listen again or to find other episodes in this series, go to Otago Access Radio's website, oar.org.nz, or to your favourite podcast platform.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.